Good evening and welcome back to Byline. This is our public affairs show here at Amherst Media. It's co-sponsored by the Amherst League of Women Voters, and it's been focused for this last year on helping people in the community understand what's been going on with the transition of our government. Mainly the government here in town, our town council, and all that has evolved from the charter, but we've also been happy to have on the show a few times now. I'm pretty sure this is your third visit.
Maybe third, fourth.
Yeah, could it be your fourth?
Maybe.
Maybe even the fourth. Representative Mindy Domb, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Glad
much
to
for
be
joining
back.
us. You had a whirlwind week.
Had a great week.
And you're going to tell us all about it now.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we only have 27 minutes, and I
know.
know you really would need 2 hours to tell us everything that happened this week, and also reflecting on your first year as our state representative.
Well, this is a good week to use as a reflection point, though,
It
too.
certainly is.
And we had public hearing on a bill that I've co-filed with Representative Marjorie Decker, and we did some great legislating. So I can talk about both, and I
Good.
can talk about it quickly.
Well, don't talk about it too quickly, because we want enough detail to understand it.
That's true.
And to be able to reflect with you on what's been accomplished here. And
Great.
probably the most important thing to actually start with, given the activities of this week, is actually the education
phenomenal.
finance bill, which is the first major one since 1993, if I remember correctly. And I was in the House at that time, I was in the Senate at that time, and had the privilege of voting on that bill.
Well,
and
thank
now
you.
you have had the opportunity some 20 years later.
It's phenomenal. So a little bit of background, just very little bit. Some people may remember that last session, there was a great deal of work to update this formula because it hadn't been updated since 1993. And as a result of it not being updated, that meant a lot of communities, particularly low-income communities, were not getting enough resources to make sure that their students had academic success.
Equal educational opportunity is a fundamental constitutional responsibility
right.
in Massachusetts. It's in the Constitution.
And it's particularly in the Constitution around K through 12. So that is sort of
only
a focus.
K through
right.
12.
So there was a lot of activity last session on trying to develop this. And then, I'm not sure exactly how this happens, but, the clock is ticking towards midnight. Midnight comes in, there's no agreement between the House and the Senate, and all that work, all that agreement, done.
Yeah.
And they broke last year and the summer, and there was a lot of disappointment that we had not crossed the finish line with getting this done. And so we came back this session with a new group of legislators, myself and other people in my class, and a lot of what we all ran on was we're going to get this done. And this whole year, there's been a lot of work on that. So there have been representatives like Representative Aaron Vega in Holyoke, introduced a bill called the Promise Bill very early on in the session, which tried to represent what he and a lot of other folks, teachers, educators, parents, students, wanted to see in a new bill. There was another alternative bill that was raised in the House. There was a Senate bill. Lots of work, lots of conversations, lots of good organizing and advocacy on the part of constituents. And a couple weeks ago, the Joint Committee came out with something they called the Student Opportunity Act, which looked had a lot of the Promise Act's pieces and had a lot of the components that advocates really wanted in the prior year. So many of us were excited that this was both a House and a Senate effort that really reflected what we were hoping was going to be in there. There was some effort to amend it. I can tell you that in the House, there were 4 amendments that were accepted early on, 2 of which were from Western Mass legislators, Rep. Natalie Blais and myself. Natalie had introduced an amendment to create a commission looking at the challenges faced by rural school districts. That is now in the bill. I introduced an amendment that said whatever accountability measures district schools were going to need to do as a result of this bill, charter schools were going to need to do too. That's in the bill too. The Senate did some amendments also. Senator Comerford had an amendment that was accepted that looks at how Proposition 2.5 affects communities' ability to fund schools, which is something that we struggle with in the 3rd Hampshire. It went to a conference committee because the House and the Senate was just a little bit different. They came out with their report on Tuesday. And Wednesday, we voted in favor of it unanimously. So I
Great.
really want to stress that. I know that a lot of people, including myself sometimes, feel like we should be voting on things even if it's not 100%. But on this bill, it gives me goosebumps to think that every representative in the Commonwealth, even those like myself, whose districts may not be facing a great windfall, recognize the value of making sure that every district has the resources they need and every student has the same best shot at academic success. But it didn't end there. They also released at the same time on Tuesday that we were going to be voting on breakfast after the bell, which is a program that allows low-income students, but really all students who may be in low-income communities, to get a free breakfast in their classroom after the school day has started. A great program that gets a lot of
It leverages federal money.
Yep.
It leverages state money. The Eros Foundation
Yep.
in the Boston area
Yep.
was the big promoter of this
Yep.
over
and,
the last
and
half
Project
dozen
Bread
years.
too
Project
has
Bread
taken
as
a
well,
big
yes.
role, and in our area, the Food Bank of Western
Food banks,
Massachusetts.
yeah.
And it's a huge program. It not only feeds students, it removes stigma from the program. It helps classrooms build community right at the get-go. I think it's also going to help those parents of those students be able to access other food programs. And so that was also sort of on our dance card. So we were going to be looking at this revolutionary funding bill to make sure that communities had the financial resources they needed and a revolutionary food program to make sure students had the nutritional resources they need. I mean, that's
Great.
unbelievable. And both passed 100% unanimously.
Terrific.
So
So want to check on a couple of quick pieces on this to see if by chance they were addressed in any way.
if I know,
Regional school transportation, 100% funding.
not 100%, but getting closer to 100%. I think I'm not exactly sure of the percentage. For some reason, I'm thinking 80%. But
But
separately,
that's on the budget, through
Yes,
the budget.
right.
So did the bill do anything to help encourage us to close that 20% gap?
studies and commissions, and I think
Studies and
so. I
commissions,
think that that's
okay.
okay because that's going to document
Okay.
further the need. Adam Hines, the senator from the Berkshires, is very influential
in
and,
that
and
one.
very strong
Okay.
advocate on that.
And what about, this was a Senate initiative also, a couple of years ago, we were working on putting together special aid for small rural districts losing population.
So I
There was
think
a special piece of aid. Did that find its way in any way?
I don't think there's aid, but this commission on rural school districts is going to address that. So I think there's an effort on the part of legislators who represent rural areas, and I'm going to say particularly Representative Natalie Blais, Representative Paul Mark, and Senator Hines. So that's Franklin County and Berkshire County,
Got it.
and the far reach, the hill towns of Hampshire County, to really look at how the funding formula does not address rural schools. Like it addresses all these different population groups, but it really doesn't address the unique needs of rural school districts. So this commission that's now in the bill would, and I'm hoping then generate a report on what we have to do to fund those programs. So there's a couple of pieces around funding K through 12 that were not completely addressed. That's one. Charter school funding is another piece that was sort of put off. And so I'm thinking.
Although the accountability measures now apply
Yes.
to them, any new accountability measures also applied to charters.
Yes, that's why I sought
Yeah.
the amendment, because
Right.
one of the things that they were looking at was since they were giving these districts lots of new money, they wanted to have some strict accountability. That was controversial. A lot of folks didn't want districts to have more accountability, or they didn't want the commissioner to have a veto, what they thought was a veto authority. The conference committee, I think, softened the commissioner's role a little bit, but kept in the accountability, and now my amendment's in there to make sure that whatever districts are subject to, charter schools will be also. And I'm
So
hopeful that's
now-
going to give us a lot more information
Good.
on how students' needs are being met in both systems.
So the bill is on the governor's desk. He has 10 days in which to sign it, veto
Yes.
it, or send it back
Right.
with amendments. What's your prediction?
I think he's going to sign it. 100% of everybody, I would hope, if 100% of every corner of the state's representative in both houses has said yes, if he vetoes any part of it, he's sort of insulting the Commonwealth. I mean, the people of we're the people's folks in there. So he may veto parts of it. We'll see. I think that with 100% of everybody voting for it, we'll be overriding it.
He would have to send it back with amendments, and that would be foolhardy, wouldn't it?
It would.
Because they're going to be
incredibly-
rejected. They're going to vote overwhelmingly to send
That's
it
right.
back, and then if he vetoes the bill because of those, then you'll override.
override it.
So it'll be just adding 2 more steps or 3 more steps before it becomes law. So sign it and move on.
That's right. And, you know, it's not gonna, it's the kind of thing that if we're put in a situation where we have to override it, we're going to be very happy to override it. We've already overridden him a couple times this session. He didn't want to lift the cap on people who are receiving public assistance to count all their kids. We overrode him. We overrode him on the Janus decision bill. You know, we wanted to protect unions. He sent him, he vetoed it. We overrode him. So, and those weren't, I think some of those may have 1 or 2 people voting no. This one, everybody voted yes. So that's not only Democrats and Republicans, that's also Democrats from very Republican districts.
And yes.
So I would think it would be in his political interest to sign the paper. But that said, I want to encourage everybody, if they're seeing this within that 10-day period, write the governor, call the governor, and say you want him to sign it without any vetoes and without any amendments. You can go on my Facebook page. I have a note that says how you can reach him. You can Google it. But he should hear from people that they're expecting him to sign it without vetoes and amendments.
So I would call it the Save Me From Myself bill.
What?
Hands-free cell phone in the car.
Wow.
Save me from myself.
Absolutely.
It's now going to become law.
Yes, it is. And it's, you know, the hands-free part of that bill was not controversial. There's a piece of that bill, though, that was. And that was the growing awareness and acknowledgement that if we're giving police additional opportunities to pull people over who are just like looking at their car, because you could be doing this and a police officer would pull you over and say, we think you're using your device. But if that is all it took to result in a police pullover, that might be abused and taken advantage of and put a lot of people in communities of color at risk. And a lot of people in communities of color have experiences where they are pulled over for what they feel are erroneous charges and harassed. So that aspect and that experience started to be something that was kind of controversial about the bill because it became something that legislators needed to pay attention to. If you're allowing this to happen, recognize that the unintended consequence is something else that you may want to address. And so I think the final bill, the House and the Senate had very different bills on this. The conference committee, actually, we thought in July that we were going to have a conference report, which fell apart. Now has an aspect in it where there's going to be implicit bias training for state police in terms of trying to get them to act, to recognize their ability to act on that training and when they're out and about. So it won't only have to do with hands held and these devices, but across the board. And there is some data collection, but it's not happening right away.
And the data collection, what's the nature of it?
So that was part of the controversial part. Some people only wanted it for ticketed offenses, and some people wanted all stops. That's the code, kind of, in terms of the advocacy.
And again, we're talking about the racial profiling aspect of this.
But to make sure that they were documenting all stops for all people so that we could actually see who are they stopping. And is there racial differences in the stops? And so the final bill has an all stops measure on it, but doesn't go into effect for a while, and it's a little bit different than what the House originally did. I think this is going to be an issue that we're going to revisit. I don't think this is the end of it. It got connected to the hands-free device, and the push to get that through as a public safety measure, I think sort of we took on some things around all stops to launch it, but I'm not sure everybody is satisfied with it.
So a little quick history on this. This issue arises every time the legislature looks at amending the laws that relate to stops, traffic stops. So seatbelts. You're wearing your seatbelt, you're not wearing your seatbelt. Do you get stopped because you're not wearing the seatbelt? And how does that because you're only not wearing your seatbelt, you're driving responsibly, you're within the speed limit, none of your lights are out, and the only reason they pull you over is your seatbelt. Big debate for many years, largely around freedom to my ability to wear it or not, and then the other was racial profiling. And quick piece of history, about 20 years ago, I brokered the deal between the two senators who were fighting, the former state police trooper who is now a state senator, and Diane Wilkerson, who was the only African American in the state Senate. She had a racial profiling bill. He said there was no need to record the stops. And I was asked to intervene and serve as the mediator between them. We ultimately agreed on a bill which was all stops. And it was passed unanimously by the Senate. It went over to the House.
And?
It didn't even go to Ways and Means. It went directly to the floor, and it passed unanimously in the House.
That's good history to know.
So after years of arguing in the same way,
Right.
people have been arguing for years in relation to handheld devices about the role that it would play in racial profiling, we have the same debate again, and you came to almost the identical result.
You know, well, see, seatbelts are a little bit different for me because that's really about the driver's safety.
Yes.
And the handheld device is about the safety of the
Everybody's
road,
safety.
right?
Yeah.
And because everybody can see when people are not only using their
Yeah.
phone to either text or check their email, whatever, but they end up swerving. Like it's a danger. And I think the 3rd Hampshire also has experience with people who have been leaders in our community who have passed away as a result of accidents regarding texting and cell phones. So I think, you know, it's great that it passed. I'm really happy that we had the debate or discussion on all stops. I hope we revisit it because I think it's an important one.
So thank you for saving me from myself. Finally,
Or not.
I will put the phone down because I know I have to.
Well, I think there'll be fines, like $100 and $500 fines, I think. So
It's not
there
only
you go.
about the fines. I now know it's
It's the law.
the law.
That's
and
right. And that matters.
it will-
People follow
will-
it.
Exactly. It will help a lot. Okay, so that's 2 big bills.
Yes.
What else did you do this week?
So this week on Monday, there was a series of public hearings in the Public Service Committee around divestment. And so some of the bills were around divesting pension funds from tobacco, from gun companies, from companies that deal with nuclear weapons, and from fossil fuel companies. And there were a couple different bills on that one. So there were some bills that would allow a local option, letting local communities decide if they were going to have their pension funds be in fossil fuel industries. And I have co-filed one with Rep. Marjorie Decker from Cambridge, a UMass Amherst graduate, which actually
Former
requires...
staff person to former State Representative
Yes,
Ellen
I'm
Story.
sorry. And she and I are on a couple of bills together. We co-filed similar bills, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cambridge and Amherst have a lot in common, and we have a lot in common. But this one in particular requires public pension funds, particularly the state's pension fund, to divest from fossil fuel companies. And so we testified on that. And I think it's a really important bill. I don't know what the chances are. I think it's one of those bills that's going to have to gain momentum. But as we can see in the Valley, we've got Smith College who just decided they're going to divest their endowment. I think Amherst College is looking at that over a couple of years. Fossil fuel companies, first of all, ain't what they used to be in terms of profitability. And in fact, you could say that lawsuits like the ones that Attorney General Healy have against Exxon put them more in financial jeopardy. But if we're going to have a Green New Deal, then we need to invest in a green economy. And I feel that the government has 2 abilities to invest funds. The first one is with revenue, with what they get from taxes and fees, and that's our budget, right? But the other one is where we invest our funds. And so where we invest our pension funds, I think, have to reflect the same values that we are putting into the budget. And for me, we need to be doing that with the green economy. So I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes. I don't know if it'll be reported out. If people want to write a statement in support of it, they can send it to me. I'll share it with the committee. The key thing when you write to committees, as you well know, but the audience may not, is to urge a favorable report if you're in favor of it, so that they can at least get it moving at a committee. That doesn't give it to the House for a vote. That just moves it out of committee, and then the advocacy and organizing work happens on a different committee. But we need to get it out of committee so that we can start the conversation.
Any other big bills get passed in the final 2 days of the formal sessions?
We banned flavored vaping products and tobacco, and we increased children's health and wellness programs. So this was one of those bills, the children's health and wellness, that there were several bills in the House that addressed different aspects. And leadership said, let's just let's create an omnibus bill, a great big bill, using the bills that are out there. And so some of the pieces of that bill would increase access to mental health care and physical health care for children. It would allow kids who are in DCF custody to be able to extend their mass health insurance to the age of 26. Makes complete sense, right? And one aspect of this bill that I really love that they kind of put into it is this ghost directory updating. So anybody in the 3rd Hampshire or in Western Massachusetts, if they're on Mass Health and they've tried to find different kinds of providers, they end up calling people in a directory. And maybe 50% of the people aren't working anymore, but the directory hasn't been updated. So your insurance company says, sure, you've got people you can use, go check the directory. Meanwhile, there's nobody in the directory.
And so you're talking about the medical professionals
that
are just not there anymore.
They've stopped practicing, they've retired.
Even though they're on the roster.
Right. Maybe they've stopped practicing because of insurance reasons, but they've retired, but they're still on the roster. So the insurance industry has said to patients, go use the directory. You've got plenty of providers in Western Mass. And then people start to call. And it's frustration after frustration. So there was legislation introduced by Rep. Christine Barber, another UMass graduate, and her legislation was to mandate a regular updating of these directories.
Great.
And they're called ghost directories because people aren't there
They're
anymore.
not there.
And I think that's a fabulous bill because not only will it sort of ease people who are looking for providers, so they won't have as much frustration, but the real benefit is it will document the loss of providers in our area. And then that'll become, I hope, a force for action.
Very good. So it's a lifestyle, not a job. You're going on a very brief break from formal sessions. Doesn't mean you're not working in the next 6 or 8 weeks.
Absolutely.
But there'll be no formal sessions. You'll get to reflect a little bit on this first year in office. But what do you want to say right now that comes to mind about the experience of being in the legislature in this first year as you were adjusting to this new world?
It's fascinating. It's the most fascinating job I've ever had, I think. There are parts that I want constituents to know that they should feel free to reach out to me if they have any issues or concerns about anything that's somewhat related to the state. It could be a personal thing with a benefits office, or it could be an issue piece. We hear a lot from constituents, but I also think constituents think I don't have to call her, and I want to assure you, you are always welcome to call and be in touch. And also, even if you know that I support something you support, like the Roe Act, the big legislation that's about abortion access, the more letters I get from constituents, the more oomph I have when I meet with legislators who are going to oversee that bill to say, you need to move this bill forward. So you're also giving me, as your legislator, the evidence that the 3rd Hampshire District supports that kind of thing. So I want to encourage people to do that. The beginning, it's like a very incredibly hectic pace. It doesn't feel as hectic now. Like I'm starting to feel a little bit more like how to read my email quickly. But I will never be as quick as you at responding to email. So I hope constituents do not hold me to the Stan Rosenberg standard of you write them at 10:11 and by 10:15 you got a response back from your public official. That unfortunately is not going to happen. But I like it, and I think it suits my nature because I'm a person, I have the goal, but I'm also okay with slicing and dicing up the pieces that I need to do to get to the goal and working them individually for the bigger picture.
How long does it take you to drive to Boston?
It really depends what time I leave, right? So
tell us about that.
So I think that if you leave anytime between 6 and 8, you're going to get in there around the same time. You're going to get in there probably around 10 to 10:30. If you leave around 8:30, I get in about 10:30. So
if you leave after the rush, you can get there in 2 hours.
An hour and a half to 2 hours. And in the afternoon, the witching hour is like 3 or 3:30. If you don't leave by then, you might as well stay till 7.
And how often do you have to leave between 6 and 8:30 because of the obligations you might have there?
I try to limit my time in the car. So I try to start my day in the State House at around 10:20, 10:30, so I can leave my house around 8:15, and then I know I'll get in there. Although I have to tell you, I had something very disappointing happen. the governor was signing the bill on college closures,
Mm-hmm.
which has 4 words that I got into that bill.
Mm-hmm.
This is the bill that was looking at transparency and
For
financial
private
stability for private
institutions.
colleges.
Yeah.
And the 4 words that I got in were, if a school is in imminent danger of closing, who would they have to call? So the original legislation said students and families, and I added host communities, staff, and faculty. So those 4 words, critically important for the 3rd Hampshire. And the signing was at 8:30 in the morning. I left my house at 5:45 in the morning. That should have been enough time, and I got there 10 minutes too late. So that was a little sad.
That's very frustrating. The reason it was a leading question. Are you guys going to do transportation next year, and are we going to see a robust handling of passenger rail?
Well, I think there's 2 things we need a robust handling of: passenger rail and RTAs. We need to do
Okay.
both.
Both.
I'm not sure about revenue, because now they've said we're going to revisit the revenue question.
But how are we going to pay for it? So we're going to put a big bill together. We're all going to
I'm
pat
hoping,
each other on the back and do high fives, but there's going to be no money to implement it?
well, there's been some little extra money coming through, but I'm hoping that we do a revenue bill that's specifically geared around transportation that does not disadvantage Western Massachusetts. So I would not be in favor of a gas tax, also with nothing coming back to Western Mass. I'm not even sure I'm in favor of a gas tax, but I'm definitely not in favor of it if there's no comparable increase to regional transit authorities and buses, because then you're giving people out here no options. I want to see more of east-west rail, both the northern route that you've advocated for and also the southern route. And I think we're moving there. I think that the more traffic gets horrendous in the Boston area, and that means more legislators, not just Western Mass legislators, are caught in traffic getting to Boston. And they have the option of commuter rail.
That's right.
The better it is for us, because we have lots of educational moments with our colleagues now.
You can't get anywhere anymore during a good part of the day
Right.
without getting stuck in traffic, and it's all over the state.
That's right. It's a mess.
So I'm going to hope that you folks can really muster the troops and not only do a strong bond bill with the big vision,
Yes.
but also find the way to pay for it.
I agree.
And on that note, we're going to thank you for a great year of service to us.
Thank you very much.
Wish you very happy holidays, and happy holidays to you all too. Although I'm going to see you a couple more times if you're a regular viewer before we end and wind up the show for the year. So thanks for being with us this evening.
Thank you.